Hello again, Reg audience, we're back. Now, as Shakespeare said, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. So we are delighted today to have two people in the studio from the other category that Shakespeare didn't mention. I'm only kidding, guys. I'm only joking. I'm having a bit of fun with them. We are inside the Cloud OS. Why are we talking about the Cloud OS? Well, that's what Microsoft have been talking about Windows Server 2012 as. And I sort of quote here, Microsoft's catchphrase, the first operating system built from the cloud up, isn't just marketing tripe. Microsoft is providing us the tools to build our own clouds, encouraging us to offload the simple stuff onto their cloud. Now, it's not all about cloud, but because cloud's going to be a part of your future, as we're going to find out, then that's going to be part of Windows Server 2012. Where did I quote this from, you are wondering? Well, it's actually from the Registered Guide to Windows Server 2012. Yes, which was written by our own in-house nerd, Trevor Pott. You know him and you love him. And Liam helped as well, I imagine. Actually, if he was working with Trevor, Liam would have been responsible for putting the commas in. I'm joking with you as well, Trevor. I don't know. I'm making enemies today already, aren't I? So, so what we're going to be talking about today is going into some detail about what this Cloud OS thing means and what you can expect from Windows Server 2012 and what you should be looking to do. You've got a lot on your plate, we know. So we're going to go into what's important to you, because we've been doing some research onto that, and where you start with that, because there are a lot of vendors are talking about the big picture vision. Well, how do you take your first step towards that, and is that going to be useful to you? That's what we aim to do in the next hour. It's quite a lot to get through, so we're going to have to prioritise. And the people having to prioritise, back to the studio for another go-around. We couldn't put him off last time. Let's see if we can do it this time. From Microsoft, Andrew Fry. Andrew, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Tim. Pleasure to be here. Really excited to be talking about Windows Server 2012 today.
All right. Start with the excitement. You've been on a tour of the regions, haven't you, doing this sort of thing already?
Yes, got back at 10 o'clock last night from sunny Birmingham.
Birmingham, great. Birmingham good? The audience in Birmingham good? So what you do, you get people, you have people in a room messing around with this, don't you, building stuff?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, they get set challenges. We get a couple of laptops. They bring their own laptops, bring your own device.
And is it all over with now?
No, York in a couple of weeks' time.
York in a couple of weeks' time? So, if you're in the northern region of England, then please, is it still possible to sign up?
Sold out. They sold out in about 15 minutes.
You can't sign up. You can't do anything about that, so you're just going to have to wait until their next release an operating system and do that again. Maybe they'll put on a couple of extra dates, sort of like
we are trying to put some extra dates on.
Well, watch out for that anyway. Okay, that's it. And I believe you were also in Scotland recently.
We were.
We've got a picture of you dressed in a kilt, I believe, with your friends. Do we have that? Is that up? Yeah. Beautiful. If you've got any comments about the way Andrew wears his kilt, for example, or any suggestions about how he could wear it better, please do bring them into us. And that also reminds me to say, please do ask questions about this. Yeah. We're going to be quite a bit more specific and techie than we usually are. So, and Andrew knows everything, doesn't he? Because he's been asked all the questions. So just ask him anything. The more difficult, the better. And so, Andrew, thank you very much. And also joining us from our old mates, Freeform Dynamics, the man in charge, Dale. Hello.
Hello, Tim. How are you doing?
All right, not too bad. How are you doing?
Yeah, good.
You've got some new research for us around this time, haven't you?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, well, it's quite interesting because we hear a lot of let's say things are not always extremely 100% positive about some of the stuff that Microsoft does, but around Windows Server 2012, pretty much universally positive feedback from everyone we speak to. So, it's interesting. I think the big question is, how do we use this beast? And I think that's a lot of what we're going to be covering today. So
yeah, so I mean. The people might like the software, but unfortunately, just getting the software doesn't solve all the problems.
Yeah, my wife's a northerner, and she has this phrase, overfacing. When you put too much food in front of someone, you may not have that problem yourself, Tim. But
I can give it out, but I can't take it, actually. I'm furious.
No, seriously, there's a lot in Windows Server, and I think what a lot of people struggle with is, where to start, how does it all fit together, and you can get bogged down in so many new features and functions. So a little bit what we're going to try and do is kind of step back a little bit and put it into perspective, but we are going to get into, some of those specifics, as you said earlier, because, a lot of good stuff here.
I'm big-boned.
Big-boned.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's...
what my nan used to say.
Yes. Okay, let's get on with it. Get on with it, Dale. Now, what's on the IT report card? What does this mean?
Well, I mean, we hear a lot of rhetoric, obviously, about the cloud is the way forward and everything else, and then you get the other camp that says, but the data center is still doing what it's supposed to do. The reality is that this is based on a bit of research we did recently. Results from about, I think, 2-3 months ago. The reality is that most people out there are running a reasonably okay ship. Things are working, but the other thing is everyone's got a couple of things they do really well and a couple of things that they're really struggling with. So, and it varies depending on the organisation, what it is. But what this chart shows, this basically focuses on the things that you get grief about from business guys if it doesn't really work very well. You can't turn things around quick enough. You're spending too much money. Things don't perform as well as they might. All that kind of stuff. So, I mean, really, this is just to say, look, it's not all a disaster area, but there's actually quite a lot of areas that you can improve. Most people could improve in. I think the important thing, though, is that this is all in the context of the world is moving quite quickly. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? There's a lot going on both internally and externally.
Yes, I think so. Nobody's mailboxes, I mean, we would have probably said this 5 years ago, nobody's mailboxes are getting smaller, databases aren't getting any smaller, file shares aren't getting any smaller. But if we look at things like the external pressures, big data, regulatory framework and so on and so forth, the amount of stuff we're having to do now, we have to tell people what we're going to do it, then tell them what we did. We've got, say, massive volumes and shares. So it is just getting hard. I did have one theory that perhaps we could get IT professionals to have more children, because we're going to need a load more IT professionals if we carry on this way.
But the
running
awful
flat
thing
out,
might
aren't
be
they?
if IT professionals sort of bred with other IT professionals, so then it's a smallish gene pool, and then certain traits would get more concentrated.
970,000 people in the UK.
Yeah, but I mean, even so, first of all, our first recommendation for you is after you finish watching this, because not during, because that would be icky. But have a larger family. However you prefer to do that. Of course, if you have the time, but make sure you do your other work first, and probably don't do that at the office either. That's a real sort of working at home thing.
No, but joking aside, actually, getting home earlier would be really good.
That would be nice.
And I think, but obviously you just go home anyway, but you're trying to keep your manager happy and go home earlier. And then try and keep the IT department being relevant inside your organisation. Yeah, is the three things I'm trying to achieve here.
Yeah, and in terms of the dynamics of the whole thing, it's easy to focus on things that are getting worse, challenges. But I think the other thing is that there's problems that we've lived with for years, and we haven't got around to trying to tackle them because they haven't been particularly easy to tackle. And I think as new technology comes along, it kind of shifts the line. So things that were too expensive to do a year ago, a couple of years ago, now you can do it within budget. If they're a bit too hard to do, I mean, they're a little bit easier to pull off. So I think a lot of this is about those shifting lines and actually tackling some old chestnuts that have been kicking around for years.
Let's have a look at some of the old and new chestnuts. So this is the vision. This is what life would be like if it was good.
So just put this into context. Yeah, there's some room for improvement. All the evangelists out there, sorry, not all evangelists like you, Andrew, but some of them get a little bit obsessed with the whole cloud thing and chuck everything into the cloud. That's the answer. In this research, I mean, it's not going to surprise you. I mean, Red Readers pretty much universally rejected the idea of a wholesale move into the cloud. Selective use of cloud services, but when you do that, you want it to actually work in tandem with what's going on in your data center. So that brings the focus right back to the data center. So you've got lots of stuff going on in the data center itself, then you've got this external stuff going on. And what most people are telling us, and what came out really strongly from this research, is we want the data center to be the hub for coordinating all the moving parts, basically, internal, external, across different architectures, that kind of thing. So what we've got here is basically... we said, all right, we all know the real world is hard. There's stuff, there's lots of constraints, whether they be financial, whether they be technology, whatever. let's just sort of clear the decks a little bit, clear your mind. Let's agree on where we're trying to get to, because we get all kinds of visions pushed at us all the time by various vendors and service providers. So what this slide here does is just basically summarise what we heard back from Reg Reader. So we sanity checked some of this stuff. Some things were rejected. You know, we don't want to give end users self-service to everything, for example. But a lot of stuff people agreed on. So people want to take more of a business services view. Focus on what you deliver as the sort of pivot point for making decisions and controlling things. And don't get obsessed with what goes on behind the scenes. So it's not that what goes on behind the scenes is not important, but it's there to deliver the business service. Now, pretty much everyone knows that, and everyone out there is telling us that. But obviously, it's quite hard to pull off if you haven't got the right kind of architecture and infrastructure. Taking a more joined-up approach, that's something that comes across really strongly. We've got a lot of fragmentation across different hardware domains, server storage, networking. Teams quite often not pulling together. This idea of resource pools comes across quite strongly as well. Whether it's building a private cloudy type infrastructure, or whether it's kind of viewing your external stuff as pools of resource, and then stitching that external stuff in, as we said, and generally moving towards removing some of the rigidity. So a much more sort of soft-coded data center, to use a sort of software analogy. So everything is kind of policy-driven, and you can move things around and morph things and extend things as you need to, which isn't the case we're hearing in a lot of situations today. So that's what people agreed on, what we're trying to get to.
So, Andrew, you've been out meeting people for their vision for the data centre, similar to what Reg Readers have been telling us?
I think it is. I think a lot of people are stuck on some really old stuff, and the challenge is there's a hell of a lot of Windows Server 2003 out there. Maybe we did a really good job when that came out, but frankly, nowadays that's going to be difficult for you to move forward without doing, for example, looking at your Active Directory domain and moving off of that, so that you can then get some of the love that's in the new stuff, if you will.
Some of the love. You can't get straight from 2003 to 2012, can you?
No, you've got to go via 2008 R2, and many people, haven't done that. And if I was going to go to 2008 R2, and we were doing this thing 2 years ago, I'd be saying Active Directory recycle bin to people, and say, because occasionally we make a mistake, and your OU called China gets deleted, and all the computers and users can no longer log in, and it's going to take you about a fortnight to get that back. Now you can do it in a press of a button. That's what I'm. That's a simple thing.
That's going to It's going to make you want to. It's going to make you want to go. Let's have a look at the what Reg Readers has been saying about cloud.
Yeah. So to put this into context, I mean, one of the things, it's all very well agreeing a vision, but no one can take time out and just focus on that. So a lot of what we want to do was look at how can we pick off some of the perennial problems along the way and deal with some of the things that people have been struggling with for years. So those old chestnuts, if you like. Yeah. And I mean, one of the things we do, I won't go into detail on this, but we talked around the idea, which Microsoft calls a cloud OS. We call it a cloud platform, just to keep us sort of clean from vendors. But essentially, you basically need a layer of stuff which allows you to coordinate and manage a lot of the new ways of doing things, so you can break some of the traditional constraints and move beyond some of the traditional boundaries. So virtualizing beyond servers is a big thing. So storage network is pretty important, and we see a lot of that sort of going on piecemeal. Doing that in a much more coherent and managed way, removing some of the constraints, scalability constraints. I mean, maybe you.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've done some testing inside Microsoft. I've seen 1.5 million IOPS inside a virtual machine. So so what are you running that you don't think has got enough grunt to virtualize it? That's been one challenge. People again a bit nervous. I mentioned Active Directory earlier because it is kind of the security guard on the gate, and you need to get that absolutely right in a connected world. And people have been nervous about virtualizing domain controllers. We've done a number of things there to make virtualizing domain controllers on whatever platform actually in Server 2012. So you might not be running virtualization in Hyper-V. We can actually make sure domain controllers, for example, can be snapshotted back to an early point in time. But you're going to have to bring your domain forward to this new operating system. That's going to take some work. But again, think about that. Now I've got everything. The benefit payoff is that I've now virtualized everything.
So we've been asking Reg Readers about virtualization for, 5-6 years.
Yeah.
My mate Andy Buss, good old regular here,
Yeah.
he's done a lot of sort of detailed work around this, and people just, they come back, well, we can't virtualize this because of this bottleneck, we can't virtualize it. And, I think it's important to sort of tackle those constraints and sort of remove those bottlenecks so you can actually have the choice. And that's not to say you should then end up virtualizing everything that you can under the sun straight away. It's just that when you start removing those kind of constraints, you can start making choices based on what's good for you as the IT organisation, but also what's good for your users, rather than just doing what you can and can't do.
But to be fair, a couple of years ago, it was a relevant.
It was
a relevant topic to discuss.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
Virtualise this. Don't virtualise that at the moment.
Yeah.
But now, what you're saying is, specifically through this, you're not finding the thing things you can't virtualise.
Yeah, so you can actually implement what many companies call a virtualization first policy. You have to come up with a detailed justification if you're not going to do it.
Yeah, that's right. And one big thing, I'll just mention one last thing on this slide. This whole focus on business services and with a mind on the sort of fragmentation we've been talking about, sometimes just getting a handle on what's going on across all the moving parts is quite hard.
Yeah.
So having some sort of coherent architecture platform, Cloud OS, whatever you want to call it, in place, gives you much more visibility, so you can actually see what's going on across the piece. You can see all the moving parts and how they work together. So the concept of managing holistically, to use that sort of buzz phrase, is a really important part of this, and we shouldn't underestimate that.
And your colleague Andy, when we were talking about this in a previous Regcast, is the importance of getting the different teams working together. And the comment did come in and said, we know about that. It's just really difficult to do, and we've got a lot of things to do already. Yeah. So, which I think is a fair comment on this. That comes to the sort of like the aspirational goal. And so I hope you'll be able to sort of like talk about some things today that'll be steps towards. Yeah,
and the two dimensions of that. One of them is sort of your organisational management people dimension, but the other one is the technology and infrastructure dimension. And I think what we're obviously we can't magic away all the people problems. Those need to be managed as usual.
Yeah.
But actually, if we can remove some of the physical constraints, then that eases the whole process.
I can think of a couple of practical examples. You typically have your data center admin, your network engineer, and your SAN engineer in a large corporate, and never the three will get like we're three of us chatting today, perhaps, and they all speak different languages anyway. So. You go and provision a LUN on a SAN, and I want it to run SQL Server, my favourite bit of the Microsoft world, although I love Windows Server.
Everyone's got a favourite bit.
And then you kind of have this weird conversation about where stuff should go, and I've got my mind in terms of storage and shares, and the SAN engineers thinking about LUNs and caching and stuff. And so what we've really done is we've been able to abstract that SAN into looking like storage. So for me, it looks like I'm getting a share. To the SAN engineer, he can see what's happening under the covers in the terms that he can understand. If we move to networking, then we have something called an extensible switch. So, for example, if you're checked out with all the Cisco qualifications, you can make a virtual switch that's controlling and being integrated into your virtual environment in Hyper-V look like a Cisco switch to the network guys. They can see what it looks like and they control it. And that's how we can do the practical boundary things. There's still no excuse for going down the pub and having a pizza with these guys, though.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's going to be a lunch later date.
Before we get sort of riots out there, we're not talking about de-skilling people, are we? We're talking about getting people working better. So you're still going to need your storage specialists and your networking gurus. And
but what you are saying is that I understand, for example, how to create shares and assign permissions to them and do all those clever things. And I know backing that is detailed storage and so on and so forth. So it's having a view of the other guy's world.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's what we need to do. If you think about moving up the management chain, a junior guy needs to be able to do sort of 80% of what his boss can do. The boss should be able to do, say, 60% of what his junior guy can do. If the network guy isn't always there, or it's late at night, if it's out of hours, you want to be able to have a basic level of trust and understanding with each other. And when I do something, it needs to show up on that guy's radar. Those sorts of things,
So the idea is the basic tasks as much in common as is appropriate. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look in more detail. Let's go into more detail on the areas that you've picked out. Now, So first of all, what's this slide for? Actually, this looks suspiciously like a marketing slide.
It sort of does. But if we think about it, we are trying to change the way that we do things in the data center, and our audiences are telling this. This Cloud OS, we could on one say, we could be saying, well, we've locked ourselves away in our big data centers at Microsoft, we had to do some things to Windows Server to make it work at scale, and then we brought this operating system out. And that would be quite good. But we didn't just do that. We also listened. You'll remember this cheesy, perhaps, campaign, Windows was my idea back when Windows 7 came out. Well, Windows Server very much reflects that. There's a lot of stuff in here, for example, that will really resonate well with hosters. Because we did go and have beer and a pizza with those guys and said, what is it you need? And you need to be able to move that old file server 10001 from our data centre in London out to the one in Chelmsford, and the applications still expect it to be called 10001 when it arrives at the other end, so we can latch onto it. So that sounds like something we need to do at Microsoft anyway. So we'll bake that into the operating system, and you can talk to it. So I think that's it. That's the kind of thing when we're doing this stuff. It's simply a recognition of what.
Can I actually just clear something up, because it's something that I struggled with for a little while when I first saw the term Cloud OS. Was that a descriptor for Windows Server, or was it a label for an architecture? Because Microsofties talk about System Center quite readily in Cloud OS, Azure and SQL and that kind of stuff. So.
Yes, I mean I think there's an issue here that we do need to clear up. Windows Server will do a pretty good job of managing for you up to a point. I've had a word with some of the product team about this, and we reckon if you added up the number of physical hosts you've got and the number of virtual machines, and that number is definitely less than 100 or less than 50, then you can do a really good job of managing that environment just using Windows Server. However, there's a load of hooks inside Windows Server, some of which aren't, the networking virtualization being a good example, that aren't completely exposed until you lay System Center 2012 on top of this. And that's about managing at scale. That's the heterogeneous of management, the recognition, actually we might be running Hyper-V, but we've got some other weird operating systems, actually cool operating systems, depending on your point of view, running virtualized on that platform, and we need to peer inside the applications and get health and so on and so forth. And also, I said about telling people what we did. We need to be able to report back. And if one thing System Center does is it tells your boss and the business what you've been up to and helps you predict demand. We talk about business intelligence, managing the performance for business. System Center is about predicting the demand of your data center rather than, say, realizing there's a big marketing campaign going off because you had a look on Twitter, which is another approach.
Yes, but not an exact one, yeah.
No.
Okay.
So it is the fusion of the two. But what I'm saying is you don't necessarily need System Center if you're at the smaller end of the business.
Exactly.
You can do quite
so the Cloud OS kind of encapsulates you're almost talking about putting a framework or architecture in place to support a way of working in a much more joined up dynamic way. And depending on the scale and complexity of your environment, that may be based purely on Windows Server, but you may actually bring some of these other components in to broaden out the scope a bit. But the fundamental idea is the same. The Cloud OS idea is consistent.
I mean, you talked about your users being a bit concerned about, your audience being a bit concerned about self-service, for example. Now, I don't imagine for a minute the finance director should be able to sort of spin up a few virtual machines. But I do respect there to be a portal there, whereas me, say, running on a SQL project team or a dev team, to say either I want a lab or a production environment, and I should be able to go and hit the help desk and say, I'd like some of that, please. And it gets ticked off my allocation, my quota of what I'm allowed to have. That's the sort of thing that systems.
Yeah. By the way, we do hear that quite strongly in that within the IT department, you want teams to be self-serving as much as possible.
Yeah, that's what I mean by self-service. That's not. I think perhaps that's not necessarily clear always.
Yeah.
Shall we go into some areas? Let's go into some specific areas. I want to get into this. You picked out these 4 and presented them to us in a sort of a Microsoft style here, isn't it?
Well, it is. I think beyond virtualization is a recognition that you need to manage virtualization. And even if you're using Server Manager just by itself, you've got, say, 4 machines running IIS or what have you. You want them to look like one thing. So we kind of blend the boundaries there. But first of all, if we're going to do virtualization, I've talked about scale. Well, that scale comes from several things. It comes from understanding the storage and being able to work better with it, like fiber channel support. It comes from understanding the latest NICs support something called SRIOV, Server Root I/O Virtualization. And that means that the virtual machine is talking directly to the NIC. So we need to understand that. We talk about virtualization, we also think about agility. We need to move virtual machines around, and we need to also make sure that, heaven forbid, if the world comes to an end, our data center dies, we've got a copy somewhere else. So we need to have ways of moving virtual machines around and copying them. So we have things like replica and be able to move virtual machines around without having bought that big expensive SAN. We can just move virtual machines. And on this fun camp day, that's exactly what I encourage the delegates to do.
Let them
Yeah, they win
move
prizes
real
for
stuff around.
2 laptops crossover cable. I'll show you in about half an hour how you can move a virtual machine between one and the other. So very, very easy to do. So there's that area to it. We talk nervously about the cloud, but if you've got that killer virtual machine, it must live. You might want a copy of it sitting in a host or on our cloud, and you might want that to be kept up to date or backed up in some way. So we can reach out to cloud services from the operating system, do things like server backups, because you haven't got the capacity. And it's a completely off-site thing. It's not in the back of the managing director's garage. It's somewhere that's trusted and controlled by certificates and so on.
Do you see an appetite for that at the minute?
I think people will take it up. I mean, cloud storage, you can go into PC World, buy a laptop, we give you SkyDrive Professional with Office 365, or you just have SkyDrive for free. I think people are getting used to storing their photos and documents in a personal world, and generally, we bring our personal culture to us to work. We don't suddenly switch modes. And so I think then you think, well, if I can trust my daughter's wedding or what have you video up on the cloud, then is there really a problem with the company accounts being up there or some server virtual machine?
So the research has something to say on this, Tim, because I think it's overstated how much people are using sort of elastic-y type cloud services quite a bit. But actually, when we're working with the Reg audience, you always get a group of people who are actually doing some of that stuff. And when you talk to those guys, it's interesting how their view differs from the ones that aren't, because they say it's important for us to be able to manage how those resources are used in the context of what's going on in our data center. Other people saying, well, I'm not really sure about this need to integrate external services with our internal services. And it's only because I think they just haven't got that far yet. And so, I do think there's a need there. It's not always acknowledged, though, I think, is the important thing. So
I think there's the reporting compliance thing is one part of that. And there is a security element as well. You want seamless integration, and let's face it, back to a self-service world, although I can go to a hoster and say, spin me up 4 VMs, if I want the trust to be federated across those, obviously we have AD for that. That's not something a self-service user is going to have the smarts to do, and that's where with our infrastructure specialists come in.
What we get pushback on is there any concept of replicating policy in the cloud environment? So wherever possible, you want a single policy, single approach to managing, whether it's security policy, information policy, whatever, the hub of which is internal, and then you apply that external. And you might be using a little bit of synchronization, but that's not quite the same as fragmenting your control. So they want to control things centrally is what we're hearing quite a lot.
So, group policy has had some minor enhancements, but, if your virtual machines are joined to your domain, it doesn't matter where they are, they're going to get that group policy applied to them. We manage by group policy, or we might, again, go up a level and use System Center and use desired baseline configuration, so we can take things into so-called maintenance mode, do some work on them. Maybe we take them out of compliance. So I might want to put the full UI on a Windows server rather than just having it the thin lightweight thing we call min shell. And then turn it back on again when I'm finished, rather than just saying it's always got to be in min shell. By the way, min shell is a great way of reducing your patching on your Windows servers, while I mentioned that. Cut it in half.
That's good. Talk to me about Hyper-V.
Hyper-V, well, we can talk to different devices now. I've mentioned SRIV, fibre channel. I've mentioned the scale thing. We did that by injecting 64 logical processors into a virtual machine. And here's the thing. If you multiply 1 by 64, what's the answer? The answer should be 64. So if I put 64 logical processors into a virtual machine, I actually want 64 times the grunt when I do that. That's why we wanted to be cautious. We wanted to do that right, because there sometimes can be licensing implications in putting logical processors into VMs on the software, and if you're paying 4 times as much, say for a 4 logical processor license, you expect 4 times the power for that application to run 4 times faster. Working with some of our other partners who are really good at doing independent validation of Hyper-V, we've seen the scalability is there, and typically you'd expect to see 93% of your physical resources being injected into a virtual machine, so you're paying 7% for management, which is not a huge commission. Less than my commission.
That's a quick question. Quick question, Steve. Any difference between the free Hyper-V server and the paid Windows Hyper-V?
Okay, so the difference is absolutely nothing in terms of functionality. So, for example,
why would I pay for it?
Why would you pay for it? You would pay for it because you don't pay for it. Let me explain what I mean by that.
Yeah.
I go and get a free copy of Hyper-V Server, and I think the license expires in 2150, so we're okay for a little while. I've gone and got 8,000 Linux virtual machines. Sorry for any Microsoft fan people listening on the call. I've got 8,000 Linux virtual machines. I put them into a 64-node cluster, each one running that operating system. And I haven't paid Microsoft anything for the privilege. Now, if I start running those virtual machines and they're running Windows Server, I could go and license the guest virtual machines. So people want to run Windows Server virtualized. So then what I do is I go and buy the full fat copy of Windows Server Data Center Edition. I license that on my physical box, and it allows me to run Data Center in each of my virtual machines.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
Now, the thing is, if I was running somebody else's virtualization platform and I wanted lots of virtual machines running Windows Server, I would still buy the Data Center copy. But, by the way, I've got Hyper-V sitting underneath it. So you don't have to go and buy that other virtualization platform.
I get it. So to be specific for people on this, probably a lot of people will know, but some won't. There's now 2 versions, aren't there? There's just the 2 versions.
Yes, we have got rid of Enterprise Edition, is what I think you're alluding to. So Standard Edition and Data Center Edition are both licensed in the same way. You go and look at the number of physical sockets on your server, divide by 2, and that's how many Data Center or Standard Edition licenses you buy on that box.
Right.
We're typically buying 4 prop boxes these days. So you just buy one Data Center Edition, and away you go. There's no difference in the features between Standard, the free one I've just talked about, and Data Center. You can have as much memory and your 64 logical processors. You can do replica, live migration, etc., etc., etc. So we've got the flexibility. It's just that Standard Edition hasn't got the virtualization rights that Data Center has.
Right.
So you can only run 2 virtual machines inside your Standard Edition. You could buy multiple for the same server, but then that gets complicated if you then start thinking about live migration. I haven't got 1 box, I've got 2, and therefore, if this is only allowed to run 4 in it, I've got 4 over here, and I'm doing something like updating my cluster, and I need to sweeten them. I now need 8 on here, so I need more licenses, and that's when you start to think, you know what, I'll just buy Data Center Edition. And there's an economic, around about 6 to 8 virtual machines, and it's cheaper to buy Data Center. And let's face it, most people are running that kind of server density anyway today when they're running virtualized. 10, 12, you know. When I run these Lash Up camps, I've got 20 virtual machines on some of my laptops. And that's my laptop.
Yeah. So it's basically you're assuming that the default for anyone of size will be the Data Center Edition.
Yeah.
Standard is ready for people who have limited requirements.
And maybe legacy, smaller business who aren't virtualizing yet.
Yeah. Any more to say about virtualization?
Not really. I think it's now kind of a given. People understand server virtualization or other kinds of virtualization in Windows Server, but we're not. That's what that Beyond Virtualization pillar is talking to. We've just made it easy to license, easy to do, and very powerful.
Good.
So looking at your diagram, are we touching on desktop virtualization separately?
Yes, that's on the right-hand side, the dark green box.
Wait for desktop virtualization.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's absolutely fine. We haven't forgotten it. It's not a forgotten corner.
We've got to do the light green and the orange pillars.
So looking at the light green bit, thank you, Tim. Looking at the light green bit, my favourite feature of Windows Server, if you press me, is the fact I can manage all my servers like they're one. I mentioned this limit on how much you do that. If you go into local server in Server Manager, say in 2008 R2 today, you can kind of see it. And then if you had another server, be it physical or virtual, you could do a bit of fiddling around, and then you could see that server too. But if you want to put roles and features on the other server or do other stuff to it, you would actually probably then RDP onto that other server and do that. So now you can imagine your small tablet or device or what have you has now got an RDP connection for all your 50 servers on it, and you can go and prod in and do each one. That's painful. So what we mean to put the flesh on the bones by multi-server management is that you can now register other servers. They can be 2008 R2, but it's better with 12. I'll come back to that in a minute. And in Windows Server 2012, remote management's turned on by default. We figured that people actually are going to be managing more than one server. So then I add my servers in, and I just maybe go and do a DNS search or, with my credentials, or I do my domain search. Now I've got 20 servers in. Server Manager quickly picks up what roles and features are on all those, and then gives you a tile, I'm afraid, a big square thing, saying here's IIS. And when you click on IIS, it will show you the 6 servers you've just brought into your group that are running IIS, and it will give you a little dashboard telling you about the health of those. And you can look at the services, the features. You can get best practice analyzer. You can get performance just straight out of the box doing that. I think that's fantastic. So you can just see what's happening. Of course, there are other ways of thinking about a group of virtual machines. We might think of a 3-tier service. So I've got a 3-tier service called Talking Heads, a bit like us today. And And then what I do is I might group my service up and create a tile for that. So I can create arbitrary tiles, drag those servers in, and I can see the health of those servers. Simple, practical, real thing. You can download a copy of Windows Server and kick that around this afternoon. And you can see exactly what I'm talking about.
It's removing this sort of fragmentation that's been well overdue, isn't it?
Exactly. It goes back to that sort of the horrible phrase holistic visibility thing that we were talking about right at the beginning.
Yeah. So System Center will do an even better job of that, and obviously allow you to reach out to other operating systems, but that's what you can do in Windows Server. Of course, the other thing is, and I'm going to mention a dirty word here for a lot of IT professionals, I'm going to say the word PowerShell, or if you're in the VM world, Power CLI. But that command line...
We should do a sharp intake of breath for that. Can you do it again?
PowerShell. When I had no grey hair and I was doing administration, it was done from the command line, and you could do some basic script, you could get your head around VB script, but now we have PowerShell. And it's a bit like Lord of the Rings, the one ring to bind them all. It is embedded into all of our product stack. And in Windows Server 2012, it's had a major revolution. So if you've looked at it and thought, ooh, too scary, have a look at it now. And if you're thinking of doing something for 5 or 10 times, sit down and write some PowerShell to get it done. And then you know that all those dialog boxes you forgot to check are going to be checked because you set the properties on it.
How's it different now?
We've got a lot better commandlets in it. We have an integrated scripting environment. It's really good as you type. It's got type ahead, so it works out, IntelliSense to give it its proper name. Even if you're browsing through a file directory and you're looking for, say, an XML file that's got some configuration in it, you go and browse the C:\/ and it shows you the folders, and then you just go to the next folder and you navigate down so you know the file is there when you run the script. One of the favourite switches, what if? So I'm going to try to see what happens if I shut down all my virtual machines, and it's going to tell me it's going to shut down all my virtual machines. Because you might have inadvertently included some that you didn't mean to in a list. And there's also kind of the developers, maybe there's some developers listening to this, you've got that kind of try-catch functionality as well. You can try something out and see if it works, and proper flow control and editing. But you might not know how to do that. So you can go into snippets and you can find how to do flow control. Every command has got help, and you can fill in a form with all its parameters in this scripting environment. And finally, we have a script explorer that will allow you to go out onto the web, or maybe we talked about that team that's not quite working together. Or maybe you have a repository inside your business of trusted scripts, and you can go and explore that, and hopefully if people have written good descriptions about what they've developed, you can reuse their code.
We've been talking on a few Regcasts recently about the problem with the amount of scripting that's done, is it introduces a great deal of potential for human error.
There is, but I think maybe less than using a complicated UI to stand something up. And I think the developers again we could learn from them about proper testing and having a repository of trusted scripts and that are tested and so on and so forth. And then we could stand up a web front end, or we could go to another level in System Center and call those scripts. And we have Orchestrator in System Center, which rather than writing your life works, I've seen Macbeth written in PowerShell. Get dagger.
Who on earth? Who on earth would do something like that?
There are some fanboys as well as some people who don't get it. But what I wanted to say is we have Orchestrator in System Center, and that is more like doing automation using a Visio diagram. And you might have a little line of PowerShell, but you're not doing all that complicated flow control. You're letting the tool do that and visually seeing how it's going to behave. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that. When we do that, talk about that. That is often people's most favourite feature in System Center. We don't talk about enough.
So you mentioned the developer world for a minute. I mean, just to finish off on that. So if you're a developer nowadays, a lot of the approach you can quite often take is just drag and drop essentially objects or high-level components and wire them together, and then code kind of magically gets created at the end. Is that kind of...
That would be Orchestrator.
Okay.
So Orchestrator has this concept of integration packs. So I talked about heterogeneous environments. So maybe you've got VMware in production. You don't trust Microsoft enough to run Hyper-V just yet. You're thinking about it. You've got it in evaluation and test. And you've got Citrix out there. So you're running Citrix nServe. You've got 3 hypervisors now. Now you clearly want to still provision, monitor, and what have you services. So you bring an integration pack for VMware. That's the pre-written code. Yeah. You drag on stop VM in VMware, and that's what it's going to do.
Okay. Which is good, because that's as you can imagine, the question that always comes in: how does it work with VMware? Yeah. So we're covering that.
Server 2012 at a low level doesn't and does, if you see what I mean. Yeah. We support Server 2012 running on various versions of vSphere. I talked about Active Directory snapshots. They work in vSphere 5.1. So we do actually have conversations with these people. We've kind of moved away from that, head-to-head sort of thing, and are trying to recognise now that our audiences actually want to work in a heterogeneous world.
Can I just wind you back quickly
Surely.
before we go
Sorry.
into the orange column to a Hyper-V thing, just to make sure that we catch the answer for this. When are Microsoft going to extend the 2012 Hyper-V Manager so that you can actually use it to manage all your servers, including 2008 hosts?
You can extend it to manage 2008 hosts. What you
There
need
we
to
go.
do is install there's a KB out there. If you look for WMI3 PowerShell 3, download that, apply it to your 2008 R2 servers. You can then manage them, and you can do PowerShell 3 on those earlier servers. There are a couple of things you can't do. One of them is really cool, is installing features. It would be good if I could go and provision a server, and I know I want application server, I want .NET Framework 4.5, I want IIS, etc., etc. I've chosen off that menu. Now I can capture that menu in an XML file, and then I can say, with one line of PowerShell, I'm sorry about mentioning PowerShell, go and apply that to server 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then just go and let it cook. I can't go and remotely add servers and roles and features into 2008 and 2008 R2 at the moment, I'm afraid. That's one area I've noticed you can't do. But they'll show up on my little tiles and tell me what's wrong, and I can remote desktop into them, and so on and so forth. You'll need to turn on remote management in server manager in 2008, 2008 R2, and then go to the command line and run winrm quick config.
Okay, if you're not getting all this down, then there is going to be an on-demand version of this. You're going to just scrub through to this part of it.
I have a series of videos called. I hate to plug this, but it's traditional.
It's sort of competitive, but we'll let you get. Well, you do some stuff on your own website.
Well, occasionally I get picked up by the registry. I do some stuff on my own registry.
Yeah.
I've made some short videos about all of this. The series is called Evaluate This. So get a copy of Windows Server, download this stuff, have a go, and then you can see it for yourself. And one of those is talking about managing downstream servers and exactly what you need to do.
Where are we going to find your stuff?
We just type Andrew Fryer into your favourite search engine.
Okay. Many
blog's
search
called
engines are available.
There are. I Google a lot with Bing.
Nice. Orange column.
Orange column.
Orange column.
So this is really about having a sort of supporting applications and understanding application health. I've got that right, and I barely read the screen here.
Yeah.
Every app, every cloud.
Yeah.
We want to be able to have you had a pretty good experience running all sorts of things on our operating system. People think, oh, I'm running Windows Server, I've got to go and develop in .NET. Well, no, actually you can do a pretty good job with running WordPress, PHP, Apache, and so on our operating system if you wish to. But you might not want to do that, and that's perhaps a recognition that in Azure you might want to stand up a Linux VM and then do all of that. So we've got all sorts of tooling in Azure, more for that than we have on our own premises. We can run Linux VMs on Hyper-V really, really well, and if you use System Center you can then see the health of those. We use something called Java Bean Spy to look at J2E apps, and then you can see how healthy they are performing and get a holistic view of how applications are working. Because you might have a mid-tier or a legacy okay, that's a bit rude. You might have a mid-tier running some other operating system, but the back end is somewhere else and the front end might be something else. You might be doing some screen scraping or so on. And some of those components could be non-Microsoft, and so therefore you'd want to see one version of what that's all performing like. That's more the System Center play, I would say, there.
Are you trying to play more nicely with other vendors now?
I think we have. I just don't think everybody's noticed yet. So, for example, if you're running Red Hat on Hyper-V, you phone us if there's a problem with that. Like the mouse isn't working because the integration components aren't there, for example. You would phone Microsoft support for that. Okay.
And you wouldn't say to them, no, it's not our problem.
No. Well, actually, that's because it is our problem, because we put the integration components into the Linux VM.
Yeah. Okay, so then there's a point about this. Say for a smaller organisation using that sort of thing, there's a change in the way that things are being done, isn't it? Because we're looking far more at sort of like the cloud-based applications and that sort of thing. And how does this does this tidy this up as well? So if I'm a small business, Windows Server 2012. How does it make it easier for them to integrate this sort of cloud application world that we've been talking about?
Yes. We're still sort of beating the persistent virtual machine role. So you can have your virtual machines up there, mix, combine them, federate them, decide what applications and services you want to have that you want to keep close to you and what you are happy to have further away, and make them all look as one. So I talked about Active Directory Federation services. That's a key plank there, so that I can authenticate. I don't want to constrain myself in, say, what operating system and so on I want to run. and where I want to run it. And I think things like cloud backup, where perhaps you haven't got a professional backup system in a small business, that knowing that we've got it covered, taped literally, could be really useful. Or working with the hosting community in the UK, and they'll be providing hooks into these services so that you can do that as well. We have, again, this is more of a system center thing. That's App Controller, which allows you to see your on-premise and off-premise clouds, so wherever your virtual machines happen to be.
Let's get on to the dark green.
The dark green. Well, it is dark green, and it should be dark green. Now, I have some friends of mine at a charity, and they took their electricity cost from £130 down to less than £10 a day by implementing remote desktop services. So they put all the heat into the data center and efficiently cooled the data center, rather than trying to keep all these laptops cool and the lights and so on in this room. And so that's quite efficient. And remote desktop services has got significant enhancements into it. And I want to be a little bit clear here. There's kind of 3 different things that you can do. Dale's still going to get a remote desktop connection to something, but what I'm going to give him at the back end is going to depend perhaps on who he is and what his job is. The most efficient from a data center tooling or what have you, green environment, if you will, hence the dark green, is to use the traditional remote desktop services. The problem with that has traditionally been it's felt like a second-class citizen.
Yes.
In Server 2012, you can even have the store in there if you wish to. The store running on Server 2012. Interesting. Yeah. But you might put that in there. So we can put modern apps into that. And we can decide that because Dale is in finance, he'll get his apps when he needs them, wherever he logs in. And we virtualize the application. This is the second kind of application. We're taking the application away from the operating system so it runs in a sandbox. So we could deploy it to a Windows 8 or Windows Server 2012 machine. And the application is executing on our data center. It would just look like an icon on your desktop. And away you go. So we could just give you an icon.
So it's giving you what you want, Dale?
It's choice, really, isn't it? I mean, the biggest objection to desktop virtualization has been, it's not for us. There are some users it just won't work for. Well, actually, with different approaches, as you just described, it still isn't right for everyone. It's still a group of users where you probably want to leave them with a full-fat desktop, but actually there's some good interim deployment options.
I think there's some interesting challenges of consumerization. I mean, we were joking earlier about different devices and tablets and so on. If I can give you a pretty good remote desktop experience on whatever device you're carrying around with it, and the compute, storage, applications and data sitting inside my data center, we have that central focus we're talking about.
Yeah, because, I mean, the focus for a lot of the people, I'm guessing, a lot of the people that are watching this at the moment, isn't necessarily how can I make my users as happy as possible. It's how can I retain control of what they have access to, how they use it, within this new world that seems to be sort of racing ahead of us.
Yeah, but coming back to that earlier example, one of the things that you need to think about is obviously user perception. With many an IT project that's gone kind of faltered and failed, whether it's an ERP system or what have you. So the hearts and minds thing is important. So if you get really good smooth streaming experience inside your remote desktop or your virtual desktop, where you have a virtual machine running in the data center, running a copy of the client OS, be it 7 or 8, and we can give you a really good experience of that. So, for example, you might use Skype and you want to be on a call, and it's going to pick your camera up on your local device, and then we're going to stream all that through, so you can do the remote working, video conferencing, whatever UC platform you want. And we're secure because we can see the smart card, so we've got USB redirection going on there. We've got really good, clever things that we do with video to make that work well, because it might be a training video. It could just be you need to keep an eye on the news wire or watch register webcasts. To keep up to speed. Then we can do that really well. In certain tests I've seen, it's actually faster to do it inside VDI than it is in the native client, because we get so good at compressing the traffic. And it's not just about playing WMV files. I'm talking about Flash, for example, here. We've done a lot of work with Adobe on that. Because what we've done, again, going back to my sort of left-hand side, is beyond virtualization, is we understand how to spoof a really powerful graphics processor unit inside of Hyper-V. We can then expose that to a Windows 7 desktop. It's called Remote FX, that's what we call it. And we had that before, but it required you to have this monster graphics card inside your data center. And the latest, awesome liquid-cooled neon lit thing doesn't fit very well in a Blade. I've tried that. It just doesn't work. So what we've done in Server 2012 is say, well, actually, if we look at what's happening on our servers, generally the last thing that gets pegged is CPU. There's usually spare CPU cycles, so we can make a nice graphics card, and then we can give you that. So if you want to run AutoCAD in a remote desktop session or something, and I mentioned that as a powerful graphics tool or some creative suite from somebody, to edit your photos and make videos and do all that stuff, then you can run that application. It might be Visual Studio. You know, you've given your guys say a Windows 8 RT device, and they need to do dev on it. Well, we can put Visual Studio in our data center, and they can do dev on these lighter weight devices when they need to.
But in your world tour, are you getting people saying, "I really want to come and I want to run AutoCAD in a virtual machine"?
Well, actually, there are some people who go underground and look at trains in London, for example, who need to do exactly that kind of thing and look at drawings when they're out on the road. And if they can get a wireless connection in a mobile phone, pip off a manhole cover, am I in the right tunnel going the right way, and what does this cable do? Absolutely. If you think about rugged advised environments, you might not want to take an expensive laptop. You've got a cheaper device or something a bit more ruggedized, but the compute's happening back at the ranch, and obviously it does rely on good comms back because it's executing services. Yeah. But I've got the data, the application, and the control. Which is good for the IT pro and giving an experience to the user they wouldn't otherwise have had. So everybody wins, I think.
Well, I mean, are we finally getting to the end of this? The problem with the virtual desktop, which is, it sounds great, but it doesn't really work very well, which has been a very long-running and very serious objection to this.
So if I look at so I've talked about the good stuff for the user. What does it look like for the infrastructure guy? Well, so if you talk to a lot of people, managing desktops, profile management is a big heartache. So the way that our VDI environment works is that we capture all of the user's data into a virtual hard disk, and that's decoupled from the virtual hard disk. That's our gold build of our deployment. But then our gold build gets updated. For example, somebody might want to deploy Office 2013. So I update my gold build and then reattach my user disks. And you log off and log on again, and you still get your data, but you're now running Office 2013. I can control that centrally from Windows Server and say how many desktops up. And again, this is something we do at those informal events where we're wearing those kilts. We actually stand that up for the users so they can actually see it for themselves. We do it live, sort of ready, steady, cook kind of thing.
The kilt's not a prerequisite, though.
Yeah. No, the kilt's not a prerequisite. We do go to other countries as well, like England and Wales and so on.
Yeah, a good way to think about it, and we've got a couple of things on our website, a couple of primer type documents that take you through this, whether it's the different desktop virtualization architectures or whether it's the user virtualization, whatever you want to call it, user experience virtualization, I think you guys call it, isn't it?
Yes.
But the whole idea is basically saying, well, look, the problem, it's about breaking the problem down. So it's not about does your desktop run here or here. It's about saying, well, actually, there are two things. There are different components in the desktop, and settings, data, applications, and so on. And for each of those components, you've got two questions. Where is it controlled? Is it controlled centrally, or do you let the user have control? And where does it execute? And I think if you pull the problem apart like that, you can actually reassemble things in a way that works for pretty much every user scenario. And I think that's the huge thing that's changed. You can actually, and it's not about building it all up from scratch. There's lots of templates and good.
Absolutely, yeah. And we do seem to forget we're in a community. I mean, we are in a community. We're on the register here at the moment, and people do share their expertise. That's the great thing about working in this profession. And so there are recipes, for example, for application virtualization and those PowerShell scripts I mentioned earlier, for example.
I mean, the reason I mentioned it earlier on was I know there have been some changes in terms of memory allocation and stuff, haven't there, over the...
Yes. Well, the other thing back to this is all about efficiency, and I didn't mention the Hyper-V thing because this really only plays into Server 2012. But I don't know if anybody's ever tried starting a Windows 7 machine with 128 megs of RAM. It'll take a little while, quite a long while actually.
Imagine.
But once you actually get it started, it's going to page for England on disk, but it will work.
Yeah.
So when we, in a VDI world, what we recognised was if we give a virtual machine a gigabyte of memory, when it starts, it'll boot really quickly. And so we can get it started really quickly. And then we can take it back, say, down to 500, but allow it to flow free, because in a user world, in an application world like that, we're opening applications and shutting them, PowerPoint, Excel, AutoCAD, we mentioned earlier, and then shutting them in, so memory goes up and down like that. So dynamic memory we had in 2008 R2 has gone to another level in Server 2012. And there's some extra smarts around that. When
I'll mention it because Microsoft took a bit of stick, didn't they, a little while ago because of some of the sort of, let's just say, suboptimal memory management.
Well, I think
the only reason for mentioning it is because I think if you've looked in the past and concluded that maybe it's hard. It's not as feasible as you might like it, then it's worth having a look again, because a lot has changed.
So go move you on, guys.
Sorry, yeah.
It's like, because we've just got 5 minutes to go, but we need to look a little bit about where you start, and and what you choose to do, because you've run through a list of things. There's a whole other list that we didn't run through.
There is, we could look at this whole Server 2012 thing in a completely different way. We could look at it as features, in terms of compute, network, storage, and so on and so forth. I think what I would be looking for is some sort of stalking horse, and I'm just going to give you one crazy example. You don't need to change very much, but it will expose you to using the new PowerShell, and it'll expose you to using the UI, and that would be to save some serious amounts of storage. Anything but your C drive, and we have data deduplication built into NTFS. And what that means is that you can save between 20 and 70% of your storage on a typical file share. So you might just want to go and turn that on. Server 2012 has got to control it. Anything else is just going to see that file share as it did before. You can even try it out. You can download once you've got your Server 2012. There's an eval file, DDP eval exe, on the install media, and you can just go and copy that onto a stick, run it against a file share. Don't be too far away from the network over this, because it's going to maybe hammer the network. It shouldn't hammer the file share, because it's going to run out of band. It'll tell you what storage you've saved. That might be such a significant conversation. I've had 3 or 4 customers, I kid you not, coming to me now saying, that's so huge for us, we're going to look at Server 2012. That gets it kind of in the door. You get used to Server Manager, you get used to looking at things in PowerShell, you start to understand some of the new other features we haven't talked about in storage, for example. And then you think, this is interesting. And then you kind of go on from there, and you build some trust and confidence in this new operating system.
Dale, what's your idea on the don't boil the ocean thing? What's the point of paying where we should be getting started?
Well, I think the pain points differ, and I think mean, it's obvious from listening to Andrew that there are so many areas you can start with. It's a huge feature set in this new Microsoft stack. The reason I put this slide together that we're looking at here is because a lot of the research that we've done with the Reg readers tell us that they've got a thread of activity going on in the server group around server virtualization. The storage guys are they're doing the tiering thing, and then they're putting a bit of virtualization in place, and they're maybe doing some dedupe, and there's all kind of stuff there. The networking guys are kind of in a world of their own quite often, just doing stuff that everyone just assumes they're getting on with, and the point is that a lot of this stuff, actually, if you start pulling the threads together and getting those conversations going between teams, there's a lot to be gained. So, where should you be doing dedupe? And that's there's no right or wrong to that.
No.
But, you've got to get the server guys together with the storage guys in the context of what's possible now.
Yeah, and I mention that because it doesn't really affect the rest of the fabric.
Yeah.
If you will, you can kind of just do that in isolation. All your other old file servers or whatever operating system are just going to work. If you want some of the other sort of secret sauce that might be in there, you're going to need to make some investment in maybe fiddling around with domain controllers. You're maybe going to have to, look at application compatibility as you move on to the latest version. You could equally, if you're server virtualization, just shunt Server 2012 underneath your existing VMs, and that's a relatively trivial example because it's not going to affect the application running, because of course it should be agnostic to the hypervisor.
You recommend that?
I will recommend looking at it, because you will get these new features and be able to inject them into the older operating systems with the right KBs for 2008 R2, and get that working. 2003 is dying out there. Just because you can run it doesn't mean you should.
The reason I stuck private cloud in the middle of this diagram, Tim, is not because it's a thing necessarily. It's as much a way of thinking and a way of sort of approaching the problem.
I understand that. It's unfortunate that it gets the label of that.
Yeah,
I know. It brings in all these things behind it. But what you're saying, the ideas, the concepts of working.
Absolutely.
But behind it. And I just want to sort of get us on to make sure that we have just a couple of minutes to look at this slide, because this is important in what's been successful, isn't it?
Yeah, in the research we had some guys who were early movers in this whole area, and what came through loud and clear was don't just pick off one aspect of it. Try and look at the thing in a very joined up way, but on a small scale to begin with. So pick off 1 or 2 problems, 1 or 2 apps, workloads, whatever, and it may be that you've got some pain points that you're focusing on, whatever happens to be storage related, throughput related, whatever, and obviously work those in, but try and sort of build a complete thing that can then be expanded
of a manageable size,
be scaled. Small scale, but but
Yeah.
complete, and then move it out from there.
Is that good advice, Andrew?
Yes, I think it is. There are increasing. I mean, there's obviously increasing third-party support for Server 2012 as well. So that's another thing I would put in here. You know, I just mentioned the storage thing as an example, but if we take that again, by way of an example rather than being specific, you need to make sure your backup solution supports all that kind of new stuff. So I would think if I'm going to do application, I need to make sure my application is compatible with all of this. And we've got a whole load of tools that we never really talk about for assessment and planning, like and working out how to scale and do these projects, and things like Microsoft Operations Framework, which will tell you, how to do all this stuff. And it's just sitting there, arms full of white paper, to maybe inform your thinking about where you want to go. But I do think there is also a kind of a need occasionally to go and have this really cool stalking horse that's going to kind of rock your manager's world, and then you can kind of get your agenda on the agenda, if you will.
Yeah. Then it gives you a little bit of room to do those things and to get some of those skills and to invest the time that you're talking.
We touched on politics. I'm going to mention this, and we're short of time. But what we got back from some of the readers in larger IT shops was rather than have this seen to be something championed by one group or another group, pick a group of guys, put a group together, picking some key people from each of your teams, and almost form a virtual team just to get this thing going. It's not that you don't even necessarily need to dedicate them to that, but just get everyone involved from the start.
We're going to have to wrap on that. But there's just one final thing on this. Someone asked us a question. You're not expecting to have everyone skilled in everything.
No.
But to recognise the skills of the others, you're offering some sort of basic way.
Think of it as a Venn diagram. All those bits of overlap where you're dependent on each other. You want that to be properly coordinated.
You need a basic working knowledge of AD if you're a SQL DBA, but you don't need to be a rock star, right?
Right, don't need to be a rock star. That's a relief anyway. We're out of time, guys. Don't forget you can download you can download the deck for this. There is a chance for that. You can catch it. You've been watching it live. You can catch it again because there was a lot of detail in that. You don't have to talk quickly when you get going, Andrew.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No, but you have a lot of stuff to put in. Don't apologise. And we hope that's been good. Let us know what you think because we like to do more of what you like. Join us soon again for another Regcast from Andrew and Dale, and I've been Tim. Goodbye.